Good afternoon. It is Monday afternoon, and we are beginning week 2 of the course. And as I often do, I would like to talk to you a little bit about what we accomplished last week and how we're going to move forward this week, and just make some observations and also maybe some recommendations. So we'll try to be quick about this, but there's some important things. All right. Last week, Unit 1. Number one, thank you very much for some very, very active and very thoughtful participation on just about everyone's part. Discussion is a very big part of this course. This is where I think a lot of the learning takes place, certainly a lot of the exchange of ideas, and this is how people communicate and understand what others have taken away from, say, the readings and what they have taken from their experience, which is perhaps the most important thing we do, is understand from each other's experience in this course. So thank you very much for the great start that people got off to. My standard practice is when we look at the week, I try to grade the discussion first, because that's what you'll be going back into right away for most people, and followed by grading the written work next. My targets, and I stress targets, because it sometimes doesn't happen because of the volume of work. But what happens is I try to get the discussions finished no later than Tuesday evening, so that you have the grade and the commentary available to you to apply in the current week's discussion. Same goes for the papers, except that I try to set for a grade of no later than Thursday, but hopefully I can get to most of them by Wednesday. Same idea. That way you have the commentary, the grade, any suggestions or directions that may be applicable to the current week will come up, and you'll have them so they're available for you to work with. So that's where I want to go there. The discussion this week, week 1, was very, as I said, very active. I think what we saw was a very interesting phenomenon when we look back at the whole idea of social affiliation and how it goes back literally into what we would call ancient history. And there are parallels between what we saw as a primitive hunter-gatherer group with the most simple of goals, the most simple of organizational structure. And we were able in many cases to make direct parallels to what we see in much more complex, much more modern organizations. The human need and the human desire for organization and affiliation hasn't really changed in thousands of years. And yet we see it in different forms. And I did challenge a few people saying, is it fair to compare that hunter-gatherer organization, say, with a modern large corporation or one of the armed services? It's an interesting point, but keep it in the back of your mind as we go forward. One of the things I really want to stress is the units tend to build on each other. So don't lose sight of what you did in Unit 1 as you go into Unit 2, and then 3 and 4 and 5, and so forth. Okay, moving into Unit 2. Last week in Unit 1, you were asked, and part of your written assignment is to identify a company from that list of approved sources, so to speak, approved candidates, and go in there and analyze their current situation according to some guidance from the text. This is great, and now you're going to move forward and continue analyzing that company. And that's one thing I want to make sure we understand. You're going to follow the same organization all the way through the course, because again, this continuity allows the course to build unit by unit by unit and just enhances that process. So this week, when last week we were looking at some very basic things, this week we're starting to look at the actual structure of organizations. How do they function? How do we define what they do? How do we define how they do it within themselves? And how are the differences apparent between different organizations? And I think that you'll find that the unit does very nicely build on Unit 1. The other thing I wanted to mention is our discussion this week. Our discussion goes back into history. To me, not that long ago, but for me, as somebody in my late 60s, this I remember as kind of the story of my childhood and my adolescence, and actually younger adulthood, was this whole idea of the Cold War, that experience of history. and what it was. And it was really a geopolitical struggle between ideologies and philosophies, and also economic and political struggle. And we ask a question in the discussion about military strategy in that war, so-called war. What I'd like to make sure that we understand is we are talking about policy, we are talking about big picture stuff. And this is where I just want to make a little bit of a side note to our military participants, because as many times in this class, we have a pretty good contingent of both active service and veterans who have quite a bit of military experience. And this will come out in the discussion. But what I really want you to do, particularly the military folks, is make sure that you're applying your personal experience, but also looking at the more theoretical side, which may mean kind of projecting yourself into a different role. So again, for our military contingent, most of you are NCOs of one grade or another, or have been NCOs of one grade or another. Definitely want you to bring that experience to the discussion, but also project yourself up, say, into maybe a little bit of a higher level. And I'm saying not just an officer level. I'm just going to suggest an 06, something on the range of a colonel, an 07, a brigadier, or maybe even higher if you want to look at it from that kind of perspective. And for those of us who are civilians, the things we want to look at it is not just from our departmental levels and what we've experienced as employees, but look up and say, well, what do we think at the upper levels of our organization would look at a strategic problem? That's the kind of perspective you want to bring to this discussion, because I think it will literally enrich it and make us think, maybe for some of us in some ways, that we are either new to thinking, not comfortable in thinking, or here's that chance that we all have to say, hey, here's what I would do. And it's a very challenging discussion. For me, as I said, it's live. It's the history. That's what I grew up with. Many of us in the class are, thank heavens, so much younger than I am. And it may be some learning some history to some of you. But I think you'll find it a very, very enlightening experience. So that being said, I really want to, again, thank everybody for their contributions in the first week. Go over some procedures and some things you can look forward to. If you have not done so, please go back and review the announcement I placed last week. The one that's a repeat of several semesters going, but it talks about how to do your discussions and your written assignments. It will make your life and my life and everybody's life easier, because I think I do try to get into that and say, why are we doing things? And there's some things I've found that people just aren't used to, that we really need to emphasize in a 400 level course. All right, that being said, I am very available, as I hope you have realized. Feel free to contact me at any time with any questions, and I'm really looking forward to what we see this week. Thank you.